Now, bear in mind, in those days, everybody was still made aware of the atrocities that took place or that was caused or were caused by the British against the Boer nation, especially the women and children. So even my grandfather and his father referred to the English as the enemy. Anyhow, this war was not something that defeated the Boers. Excuse me, let me start over again. This war was because the English was after the gold that was discovered in South Africa. And they could not defeat us on the battlefield, notwithstanding the fact that they were an army of 500,000 strong versus a Boer army of only about 20,000 fighting men. Make your own calculations. 500,000 against 20,000. At that stage, the whole Boer nation was only about 100,000 strong. Then, with this being the case that the Boers could not be defeated, the English started a policy of a scorched earth policy, meaning that they started rounding up women and children from farms and forcing them into concentration camps. All crops, cattle, you name it, anything that was alive that belonged to the Boers, including houses, everything was burnt down to force the Boers to surrender.
And what did they do in those camps to the women and children?
Well, that was probably the biggest atrocity of all. Is you can find it in some history books, but for some reason in political correctness, it's not really published widely. But it was nothing but a genocide. The Boer nation was 20,000 strong. The Boer nation was 100,000 strong. And the English killed 26,800 and women and children. 26,800 women and children. That is 26.8% of the nation or the total population that they had killed. If those women and children were not killed, that's the other thing people or the historical books and historians will not tell you. If 26.8% of the nation was not exterminated, the South African nation would never have been, by now at least, a minority population if all those women and children were to have lived.
How did they kill them?
That is what the historical books also won't tell you. They were rounded up and in the concentration camps. There was hardly any food. And if they were given some food, it contained copper sulfate and ground glass. And that's what killed most of the women and children. Copper sulfate and ground glass in their food. So you can understand that there was a tremendous hatred by the men folk who participated in the war against the English or who heard about it directly from their fathers and their mothers. This feeling was handed down the line. And where we lived in Johannesburg, my grandfather, although I'm not too proud of it thinking back of it now, He gave me 10 shillings, which was the equivalent of $1 in those days, for every English kid I beat up. Not English kid, but every English speaking kid I beat up. And of course, I got a spanking when I did that, but at least I could verify. I could tell my grandpa, go ask my dad. I got so many spankings, so many spankings. You owe me so much. And that was it. Okay, let me just get to the. Well, the nice thing about the short period that we lived in Johannesburg with English speaking kids all around me, I learned to speak the language of the enemy within 18 months. We only lived in Johannesburg for about 18 months, 18 months, I think. When we moved to Pretoria, and my father continued his pathology studies at the University of Pretoria, which had in the meantime opened a pathology faculty as well. If I think they call it a faculty, I don't know. Well, part of the medical faculty. Now, my dad and mom bought a beautiful house in Waterkloof Ridge, a very posh suburb, high on a hill overlooking Pretoria in the valley below. That may have been wonderful for them, but it was not wonderful for me because I had to ride my bicycle to the school and back. Fine, in the mornings, I could just about free ride all the way down to school. The problem was I got back midday. I had to pedal up those hills, which was not an easy accomplishment. Sometimes we were lucky, and there was a brick lorry, as we called it, but it was a truck belonging to a brick company, brick manufacturing company called Rosema and Klaver. And of course, going up that hill, the truck itself went pretty slow, but we would cycle up, or I would cycle up, and at the rear left-hand side of the truck, grab hold of one of the locks or whatever, protruding piece of metal, with my right hand, steer my bicycle with the left hand, and I was pulled up the hill all the way to Canopsa Street. One day, things did not work out too well. I was holding on to this truck, going up the hill back to home, and just as we were about to the top, a car honked at me behind me, angrily honking. Of course, I can't look back. I'm going to lose my balance. And I'm holding on with my one hand, with the other hand. I couldn't for the hell of me. Why is he honking at me? Anyhow, when I came to Canopsa Street, I had to let go because I had to turn right while the truck was continuing up the mountain. And who was behind me honking? My father in his Volkswagen. For some reason, he decided today was a good day to come back home for lunch. And here I was going up the hill, something very dangerous, and he caught me right in the act. Of course, I got a spanking that I can still remember to this day. But that was not all. He called the headmaster of the school and told him about this practice that was going on between kids this practice, kids were involved in trucks going up the hill and holding on to them, going back home. Called the headmaster, as I said, and the following day the whole school was called to assembly, or the assembly hall. And man, there were 5 or 6 uniformed officers of the traffic department. And Dr. Stander, the headmaster, or Oom Bok as we called him, Uncle Buck, introduced these gentlemen, being just about the whole head of the traffic department of Pretoria. They gave us a lecture. Of course, I can't remember the details, but what it amounted to is if any one of us ever got caught again holding on to a truck going up that hill, which was illegal and dangerous, we would be arrested and locked up. Of course, that was hogwash. Why would you be arrested and locked up for something like that? But we were small little kids, and we were easily indoctrinated, if I can use that word. So, but this practice stopped right there in its tracks for some of us, not all of them.
I gotta ask you, I thought it's kind of cute how you call your headmaster Uncle Buck.
Yeah, he was Oom Bok, Uncle Bok, Oom Bok. He's for some reason he was called Buck. I don't know, Oom Bok. I mean, he must have gotten that name when he was a kid himself, but it carried over.
The uncle part.
Anybody that was 10 years older than you in South Africa, you address as Uncle or Mr. So and so. Of course, we didn't like the formality of Mr. So and so and so, so he was Dr. Stander. But if we went to the principal or summoned to the principal's office and whatever, and we spoke to him, it was Oom Bok. We addressed him as Uncle Bok.
And what about ladies?
Ladies, if they were 10 years older than you, you were addressed as Tannie, which is the equivalent of being called auntie. So it doesn't matter, it was just an address, a respectful form of address. We didn't do this, Mr. So-and-so, or God forbid, like they do here in America, anybody calls even an old person of 100 years old, American kids address by his first name. Not in your life would that ever happen. He was Oom so-and-so, which is Uncle so-and-so, or Auntie so-and-so.
If it was more formal, would you call them Mr. or Mrs. and then later more of an endearment if you call them auntie and uncle? Or
for us, there was no formal this and this. Wherever you got, even if it was church, even the minister at school, at church was called Uncle so-and-so, not Dominee meaning Pastor so-and-so. No, it was Uncle so-and-so. Now, okay, let's come back to living in Pretoria. This is 1962 to 1965, more or less. Okay, well, I told you, no, sorry, I've already covered some of it, with the truck and going up the hill, etc., etc. But there was another story. My nephew, Ernst van Jaarsveld, he was always involved with anything nature, whether it was insects or snakes or whatever. Nature was his everything. And as a matter of fact, he became the chief botanist of Cape Town and the Rondebosch. Was it Rondebosch?
Was that your nephew or your cousin?
Cousin.
And you said nephew, so I just want
Okay, that's the other thing. An Afrikaans nephew and nephew is the same thing.
Oh, really? Nephew and cousin?
Yeah, same thing.
Oh, okay.
But as I say, he was Kirstenbosch, not Rondebosch, Kirstenbosch Botanical Garden. He was the chief botanist there. But when we were kids one day, it was a Friday or a Saturday or whatever, and we decided to make some explosives. But, and we used, what was it? Potassium chloride, I think. Potassium chloride, which was available at any pharmacy. You could go and buy it. The pharmacist won't ask you, what do you need it for or whatever. Maybe your dad sent you to come and buy it or whatever the case may be. So they gave us. No, we wanted to make some bombs. And we did. And we went, where we wanted to explode them was in the Pretoria Country Club, on the golf course. because it had a lot of ponds as water traps, for golf water traps. So we had some styrofoam and put these damn explosives on the styrofoam with long enough fuses after we lit the stuff to get away, safe distance. Of course, when those bombs went off, it wasn't long before the whole damn pond was full with floating dead fish. But what we forgot was that if you make such a big noise and bang, people are bound to come and look for what's going on. So we couldn't retrieve the fish that we had killed. We just had to run for our lives, or shall I say, run for our asses, because if we got caught, we would be spanked badly. Now, one day, talking or getting back to the story of the Boers and the English, it was a Saturday morning, and a couple of mates of us, a couple of Afrikaans-speaking guys and English-speaking guys, of course, we started playing a game of the Boer War. So it started with, first started out with each other shooting with slingshots, you know what a slingshot is. And then, of course, we retreated a little bit, or they retreated a little bit. The distance increased between us, so we couldn't hit them. So one smart ass went and fetched his pellet gun. Okay, now we could at least hit them again. And so it went on, the other guy went to fetch a pellet gun, and eventually the distance increased again, because we couldn't reach each other with pellet guns. So one of the enemy on the other side, the English kids, went to fetch his father's .22 rifle. And bang and bang and bang and man down, poof, me. I was shot in the leg with a .22. And of course, the Boers lost the war right there and then again. Went back home, bawling, whatever. Well, I can't even remember if I was bawling. I probably wasn't. All I know is I was bleeding profusely and limping. And when I got back home, my mother called my father. There was no such thing as cell phones in those days. And she couldn't get hold of him. He was probably on his way home already. But anyhow, not too long after that, my father pitched up at home, told him the story, and being a doctor, he did what he did, gave me an injection, killed the pain, and he got his instruments out and removed the .22 bullet from my leg, stitched it up, and then he wanted to know who was all involved in this Boer fight game. I told him. Somehow, we got all the numbers of their fathers. You called them and said, okay, come on over at a specific time. We have an issue to discuss. Of course, let's say that afternoon, about 5, 6 o'clock, all the kids and their fathers pitched up at my house. Oh, we were the best, 10 or 12, 5 or 6 to a side, And everyone got a spanking from every father. Not every kid was spanked by his father. I was spanked by all the fathers, 6 of them. This one, my buddy, was spanked by 6 fathers. Everybody, oh my God, and I think that amounted to at least 24 blows on your ass. My butt looked like a bloody raw liver that evening. But we got that message, and that was the end of the Boer War fights. Let me just see where we are now. Oh, gosh. Not a good friend in those days. Today he is, I don't know, he might be retired already. Renan de Villiers. I know he became a exceptionally good conveyancer, a lawyer, a lot of specializing in conveyancing. But he came with me to our farm for one April holiday or whatever the case may be. We were there for about 2 weeks. So at least I had time to catch up with Papiso and Puling and whatever, and we played all over the place. And we were on top of the mountain, the one that I told you that had the sunken holes in it, and we were playing there. So I could look down on Roosfontein where Ines lived, and I could look down on our side, Wintershoek. And in the cherry orchard, I saw what do you call it? A pig, three pigs foraging in the cherry orchard. And I decided to go with this. I know they can't do that, so Rhiannon and I, we shot the one pig. Or shall I rather say, I shot that one pig. And the story very quickly reached the farm manager, Uncle Flip, Oom Flip as we called him. But I told him, no, these pigs were damaging our cherry trees. That's why I shot them, not because I was naughty. The bloody pigs came over from that side, and from the adjoining farm, and they're doing damage in our cherry crops, our cherry trees. So I went to show him. He says, no, he wanted to see this for himself. So I went to show him. When we got there, there was no sign of a dead pig. It was already butchered, and the parts, the parts of the carcass were already carried back by the owner to his little kaya on the Roosfontein side. So at least I wasn't in trouble this time for whatever I did.